Imagine a world where crossing the Atlantic felt like disappearing. Before 1912, ships were largely isolated, relying on sightings and signal flags. News from home trickled in weeks late, and emergencies were met with limited ability to call for help. But then came the wireless telegraph, a revolutionary technology promising to shrink the oceans and connect the world like never before. This new world of wires and sparks, though still in its infancy, was the backdrop against which the Titanic would send its fateful SOS. The early 20th century was buzzing with innovation, and the wireless was one of its brightest stars. Guglielmo Marconi, the Italian inventor, had proven that messages could be sent through the air without wires, revolutionizing communication. Suddenly, ships could communicate with each other and with the shore, turning the vast ocean into a network of interconnected vessels. The Titanic was at the forefront of this technological wave. Its radio room, often called the Marconi room, after the inventor himself, housed one of the most powerful wireless sets of the time. With a range of hundreds of miles, the Titanic could communicate with land-based stations like Cape Race in Newfoundland, bridging the gap between Europe and America. For the wealthy passengers aboard the Titanic, this was a marvel. They could send and receive telegrams from the middle of the Atlantic, sharing news with loved ones and conducting business from afar. Having a wonderful time, they might tap out, or perhaps arriving in New York next week. It was a luxury, a status symbol, and a way to stay connected to the world they had temporarily left behind. But for the ship itself, the wireless was much more than a luxury. It was a lifeline, a crucial tool for navigation, weather reports, and most importantly, emergency communication. In a world before radar and GPS, the wireless was the best hope for alerting others to danger and summoning help if disaster struck. Life in the Marconi room was a blend of cutting-edge technology and old-fashioned hard work. Two dedicated wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, were responsible for keeping the Titanic connected. They were young, skilled, and dedicated to their craft. Jack Phillips, the senior operator, was just 25 years old but already a seasoned veteran of the Marconi Company. He was responsible for managing the flow of messages, deciphering Morse code, and maintaining the complex equipment. It was a demanding job, often requiring long hours and intense concentration. Imagine him hunched over his desk, headphones clamped tight, the rhythmic tapping of the telegraph key filling the small room. Harold Bride, the junior operator, was even younger, at just 22. He was new to the world of transatlantic communication, eager to learn from Phillips and prove his worth. Together, they formed a team, responsible for keeping the Titanic in touch with the world. But this new technology wasn't without its quirks. The wireless was still relatively unreliable, prone to interference, and dependent on weather conditions. It could only send or receive one message at a time, and its effectiveness relied entirely on the skill and diligence of the operators. Imagine the pressure they faced, knowing that every missed message or garbled transmission could have serious consequences. Furthermore, communication protocols were not yet standardized. Ships used different codes and abbreviations, and operators sometimes struggled to understand each other. It was a world of constant learning, adapting and improvising. The wireless also brought with it a new kind of maritime culture. Operators developed their own slang and inside jokes, communicating with each other across the vast ocean. They called each other "old man" in their Morse code messages, a term of endearment and camaraderie. They shared news, gossip, and even the occasional poker score. It was a community of like-minded individuals, connected by the invisible threads of the wireless. But even amidst the casual chatter, the operators understood the gravity of their responsibility. They were the guardians of communication, the gatekeepers between the ship and the outside world. They knew that in the event of an emergency, their skills could mean the difference between life and death. Looking back, it's easy to see the wireless room as a symbol of both progress and vulnerability. It represented the incredible potential of technology to connect and protect, but it also highlighted the limitations and challenges of relying on a system that was still in its early stages of development. This was the environment where the Titanic's final SOS would be sent. Here is the script for Decoding Disaster, Titanic's desperate SOS calls, and the death scream. Let's delve into the final hours of the Titanic, as told through the frantic language of Morse code. The decoding of the Titanic's final SOS messages, sent in the agonizing minutes before the ship disappeared beneath the waves, has been described by researchers as groundbreaking. For years, it was believed that the wireless messages abruptly ceased around 2:17 a.m. When the power failed, the lights went out, and the wireless set fell silent. However, experts analyzing garbled bursts of Morse, preserved in the logs of ships straining to listen that night, now believe the Titanic's final transmission came even closer to 2:20 a.m., the precise moment she broke apart and sank. The content of those final dots and dashes has left many speechless, not only because of their content, but because they represent the last audible trace of the Titanic's voice. Can you imagine hearing a ship, moments away from vanishing forever, still desperately trying to speak? And could that faint, broken signal, remembered as the death scream, have been more than just static? The story begins at 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, when the Titanic collided with the iceberg that sealed her fate. The impact tore open her hull on the starboard side, breaching compartments designed to keep her afloat. Captain Edward Smith and his officers frantically tried to assess the damage on the bridge while water poured in below deck. It took less than half an hour for the wireless room to transform from a hub of passenger chatter into a desperate command post for survival. At 12:15 a.m., senior wireless operator Jack Phillips, assisted by junior operator Harold Bride, tapped out the first official distress call. It read simply, CQD MGY, position 4146N 50.14W. CQD was the Marconi Company's distress signal, an abbreviation recognized by operators worldwide. This was the first time the Titanic openly admitted to the world that she was in mortal danger. The first ship to respond was the German liner Frankfurt, approximately 160 miles away. Its operator asked the Titanic what was wrong, and Phillips replied with cold precision, "We have struck an iceberg and sinking by the head." Other ships quickly began relaying the call. The Mount Temple passed the word along, broadcasting to all stations within reach. "Attention all stations, Titanic is sending CQD asking for help." On shore, the Cape Race station in Newfoundland caught the signals, forwarding them to New York. Within minutes, the Titanic's plight was no longer her secret. The Atlantic airwaves carried it to anyone listening. At 12:25 a.m., the Titanic's signal reached the Cunard liner Carpathia, about 58 miles away. Its operator, Harold Cottam, had been idly listening before bed, his headphones still on. At first, he thought it might be a mistake. "Do you know you are sending a distress call to Cape Race?" But Phillips's reply left no doubt. The Titanic was sinking. Carpathia's captain, Arthur Rostron, ordered his ship turned around at full speed, pushing the engines to their limits. The Carpathia wouldn't arrive for another 4 hours, but her wireless messages reassured the Titanic. "Coming hard as we can, old man. All our boats ready." That small phrase, "old man," was wireless slang, a gesture of solidarity between operators who knew they might never speak again. As the minutes ticked past midnight, the Titanic's wireless sparked with growing urgency. Phillips sent messages to any ship within reach: Baltic, Olympic, Virginian, Burma. Some were hundreds of miles away, too distant to help in time, but they all began steaming toward the Titanic's coordinates. Others, like the Californian, were much closer, but tragically deaf because their sole operator had switched off his set after Phillips's earlier rebuke. Between 12:30 and 1:30 a.m., the wireless room became the stage for the Titanic's unfolding tragedy. Phillips sent words that carried the weight of 2,000 souls. Women and children in boats. Cannot last much longer. Then, come at once. We are sinking fast. Another followed. Engine room flooded. These weren't just signals. They were the ship's heartbeat, each transmission a reminder that the clock was running out. But the airwaves were crowded. Other ships, desperate to confirm details, clogged the channel with questions. Phillips, exhausted and furious, snapped at the Frankfurt's operator, who kept asking for clarification. "You fool! Keep out! Keep out and stand by!" It was the cry of a man who knew that every second wasted meant more lives lost. At 12:45 a.m., the Titanic introduced a new code. Until then, CQD had been the standard distress call, but Bride, perhaps trying to break the tension, made a grim joke. "Send SOS," he told Phillips. "It's the new call, and it may be your last chance to send it." Phillips obliged, tapping out the now universal SOS signal. 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots. It was both routine and chilling, the first time SOS had been used in a disaster of this scale. From that moment on, by 1:30 a.m., the mood of the transmissions had changed. Earlier messages had been urgent but measured. Now they carried desperation. "We are putting the women off in boats," Phillips sent. "Cannot last much longer." Another read, "Come quick. Engine room nearly full." The Carpathia, straining at maximum speed, sent reassurance after reassurance. "Coming as fast as we can." Other ships added promises, but the math was impossible. None could arrive in time. The climax came between 1:30 and 2:10 a.m. as the Titanic fought to stay afloat. On deck, lifeboats were being lowered. Flares were firing into the night, and the ship's list was growing. In the wireless room, Phillips kept tapping, his fingers stiff, as Bride stood beside him, relaying positions and answering replies. Reports suggest the operators continued sending both CQD and SOS, alternating rhythmically, even as the floor beneath them tilted and the cold crept in. The Carpathia's operator, listening intently, later recalled the Titanic's words as haunting. "Women and children in boats. Cannot last much longer." By 1:45 a.m., the Titanic still had power, but the signals were weakening. By 2:00 a.m., water was rising toward the wireless room itself. Phillips kept sending until the last possible minute. Around 2:10 a.m., Bride forced him into a life jacket, telling him it was no use to die at the key. Together, they tried to flee, but Phillips returned, once more to his post, unable to abandon it. Survivor accounts later confirmed that the Marconi room was fully abandoned only when water began flooding in. And then came the final moment. Around 2:17 a.m., the Titanic's signals abruptly ceased. The Virginian's operator reported hearing a faint, garbled burst around that time. Not a coherent message, but something like static exploding into the headphones. Some believe it was Phillips's last attempt to send SOS as the set shorted out. Others argue it was the sound of the Titanic's electrical systems collapsing as water swallowed the dynamos, a physical death scream of the ship itself. Experts who studied the logs decades later concluded that what was captured may not have been human at all, but the electromagnetic chaos of a giant ship tearing itself apart. Whatever it was, it marked the exact moment when the Titanic's voice fell silent. By 2:20 a.m., the Titanic was gone, her bow plunging beneath the surface, her stern rising high before breaking apart. 3 minutes after the last signal, the ocean closed over her. The silence that followed was deafening on the airwaves. Yet other ships, unaware that she had already disappeared, continued to call her name. At 2:35 a.m., the Carpathia signaled, "If you are there, we are firing rockets." At 2:58 a.m., the Burma called into the void, "Hope you are safe." These unanswered calls, thrown into darkness, still read like epitaphs written in Morse code. The decoding of that final, broken signal at 2:17 a.m. has given historians a precise timestamp of the Titanic's last breath on the air. It is both a scientific and emotional discovery. Scientifically, it shows the limits of early wireless and how interference, power failure, and even catastrophic destruction could produce ghostly bursts mistaken for words. Emotionally, it captures the horror of a ship, still trying to speak as it died, her operators refusing to stop until the water forced their hands. That faint noise wasn't just static. It was the sound of the Titanic herself, drowning. Echoes in the silence, the unanswered calls, and the legacy of reform after Titanic's loss. At 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, the Titanic vanished beneath the waves. But even as she slipped into the cold embrace of the Atlantic, a chilling chapter of the disaster continued to unfold, one marked by desperate, unanswered calls echoing through the night. While Titanic's own signals had ceased, the airwaves remained alive with attempts to reach her, painting a haunting picture of a world struggling to grasp the enormity of the loss. Imagine this: ships scattered across the vast ocean. They're wireless, operators hunched over crackling receivers, still trying to contact a vessel that no longer existed. To them, the Titanic was simply delayed, perhaps grappling with power outages or hampered by the aftermath of the iceberg collision. They continued to send messages, their words tinged with hope and expectation, unaware that they were addressing only the silence of the deep. The logs of these ships tell a heartbreaking story. Minutes after the sinking, the Carpathia, racing towards the last known location of the Titanic, transmitted, "If you are there, we are firing rockets." Harold Cottam, the Carpathia's dedicated operator, could only hope for a response, utterly unaware that the great liner was already resting on the ocean floor, its lights extinguished, its passengers lost. Then, 23 minutes later, the Burma chimed in, sending the heartbreaking message, "Hope you are safe." Those words, laced with optimism, stand as a stark reminder of the tragic reality. A world grappling with a catastrophe it couldn't yet comprehend. Over 2,500 souls were already lost, their cries swallowed by the unforgiving sea. The unanswered calls continued relentlessly. The Titanic's call sign MGY repeated again and again, as if sheer persistence could conjure a response from the depths. But MGY would never reply. Those three letters, once symbols of luxury and grandeur, now hung in the air like spectral echoes of a forgotten dream. These after-midnight transmissions possess a unique and devastating power. It is one thing to hear the Titanic's desperate cries for help, but an entirely different and arguably more tragic experience to witness others calling out to her, oblivious to the fact that they were addressing a watery grave. We can only speculate about what Cottam on the Carpathia felt, as moments before, his friend Harold Bride sent messages to him in his last moments. What must have been going through his mind as he continued sending messages to a ship that was gone? What does it mean when vessels call out into the darkness, convinced their signals are reaching human ears, while in reality, they are speaking only to the fathomless silence? It is this agonizing question that imbues these transmissions with their profound emotional weight. Meanwhile, the men who had tirelessly manned the Titanic's wireless equipment were no longer at their posts. Jack Phillips, the senior operator, remained at his key until the encroaching seawater forced him to abandon his duty. Exhausted after days of relentless work, the 25-year-old dedicated his final moments to relaying distress signals, sacrificing his own safety for the sake of others. Harold Bride, the junior operator, survived the disaster, though not without enduring immense hardship. After assisting Phillips in sending the final messages, he was swept into the frigid ocean, clinging precariously to an overturned lifeboat alongside other survivors. Severely injured and half-frozen, Bride managed to stay alive until the arrival of the Carpathia. Fate, however, had a cruel irony in store for him. The wireless operator on the rescue ship was none other than Harold Cottam, Bride's close personal friend. Just days before, they had exchanged light-hearted messages across the airwaves, their camaraderie spanning the vast ocean. Now, they were reunited amidst unimaginable tragedy, not in a bustling wireless room, but on a deck overflowing with traumatized survivors. Despite his own injuries and trauma, Bride found the strength to assist Cottam in sending out the torrent of messages, pouring in from survivors desperate to contact their loved ones. The Carpathia's wireless equipment crackled with activity as survivors informed their families of their fate. Reporters clamored for news, and government agencies coordinated rescue efforts. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit that Bride, having lost his ship, his colleague, and nearly his own life, returned to the quay and resumed his duty. The same hand that had transmitted the Titanic's final pleas now carried words of life and reassurance, a powerful symbol of hope amidst profound loss. The contrast between the human drama unfolding and the seemingly detached efficiency of Morse code is striking. To an outside observer, the dots and dashes may have seemed impersonal, stripped of emotion. But behind each signal stood a human being, headphones pressed against his ears, surrounded by chaos, cold, and the chilling awareness of mortality. These unanswered signals continue to resonate deeply because they remind us that death is not always accompanied by dramatic pronouncements. The Titanic's final gasp may have been a burst of static at 2:20 a.m., but the true tragedy lies in the ensuing silence, punctuated only by the futile attempts to communicate with the dead. This is a scenario that resonates with us all, for we have all experienced the pain of calling out and receiving no reply, of speaking into the void. When the Carpathia's rockets pierced the horizon, the survivors huddled in lifeboats knew they were saved. But across the ocean, those who continued to listen did not yet know the Titanic had been lost forever. For hours, even days, the reality remained shrouded in speculation, rumors, and the lingering hope that a ship as magnificent as the Titanic could not truly be gone. The wireless world had never witnessed such a catastrophe before. There had been collisions, groundings, and rescues, but never had a vessel of this size, carrying so many lives, transmitted its final moments live on the airwaves. It is this detail that makes the story of the Titanic so enduringly powerful. The wireless did not just carry distress signals, it carried humanity itself. It carried loss, courage, silence, and ultimately survival. And it carried them in dots and dashes that continue to echo across the ages.